This happened when I was 15 years old. My best friend Anthony had invited me over for the night since his parents were going to be gone all weekend. The idea of having the whole house to ourselves felt like freedom, and we were both hyped. I rode my bike over just as the last traces of sunlight were disappearing, the air warm and still. The kind of night that felt perfect for staying up way too late. I wheeled my bike into his backyard and quietly let myself in through the back door, like I'd done dozens of times before. The house was dim, save for the glow of the living room TV. We started off playing every video game Anthony had, from FIFA to Call of Duty, our fingers mashing buttons, junk food piled between us, popcorn scattered all over the carpet like confetti. The room smelled like salt and grease, and the hum of the console was almost hypnotic. As the hours passed, our energy began to dip. We gave up halfway through some movie we'd picked and decided to amuse ourselves with prank calls. It was just past 10 p.m., that magic hour where everything felt a little more daring. Anthony went first, dialing a few local pizza joints and putting on ridiculous accents. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. Then it was my turn. I didn't have a plan. I just punched in a random number, hoping someone might actually pick up. First call, no answer. Second, voicemail. Third, some weird buzzing noise. But on the fourth try, someone answered. A man's voice, deep, rough, almost gravelly. Yeah? Not a hello, not even a who's this, just that low, unwelcoming grunt. Anthony was still chuckling behind me, and hearing him made me lose it. I stumbled over my words mid-sentence, trying to hold back laughter, but it slipped through. I'd never done a prank call before, and I was terrible at it. I sounded like a kid trying too hard. But the man on the other end, he didn't laugh. He didn't say anything. Just silence. The kind that presses against your ears and makes you wonder if he's still there or listening too closely. I forced myself to pull it together, straightened my voice, and tried to finish what I'd started. It went something like, sir, would it be all right if I borrowed one of the wheels from your car? A dumb question, classic prank call nonsense. I expected confusion, maybe a curse word. But instead, his voice dropped even lower, calm, but somehow colder. What's your name, kid? My name is Bob. There was a pause, just long enough for my stomach to tighten. Really? He said. You sure it's not Anthony? It hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked up. Anthony had stopped laughing. His smile was gone. His face, usually bright and animated, was now pale and frozen. His mouth slightly open, eyes locked on mine with growing dread. He didn't say a word, but I could see the fear written all over him. I hung up the phone without another second of hesitation. My fingers trembled as I pressed the button, not wanting to hear even a breath more from whoever was on the other end. Because somehow, that man knew. He knew exactly who was in the room. Anthony, who the hell was that? I asked, my voice low but sharp, like I was trying to convince myself it hadn't just happened. I don't know, he stammered, eyes still fixed on the now silent phone. I pressed him. Does your caller ID show your name or something? No, he said, shaking his head. It shows my dad's name. That didn't make me feel any better. We immediately jumped onto his computer, hoping logic would explain what fear was trying to inflate. Maybe this guy had some app or service that linked numbers to names? Maybe it was a weird coincidence. We tried to search everything we could think of. How can someone get your name from your phone number? Reverse lookup, caller ID hacks. But nothing we found could explain how the man knew Anthony's name, especially so fast.
He was only 15, too young to have any public records. He wasn't on those sketchy personal info databases we sometimes stumbled across online. None of it made sense. With no real answers, we ended up posting the question to Yahoo Answers, desperate for some kind of explanation. But the post just sat there, unanswered. We weren't alone in the house, but it sure felt like we were alone in the dark with this growing fear, and nobody could explain it away. I told Anthony maybe he should call his dad, maybe check if he knew anything. But Anthony shook his head almost instantly. "I'm not supposed to have anybody over," he said quietly. "If I call, he'll know." So we let it drop. Kind of. We didn't talk about it anymore, but that dread still hovered like a low hum in the background. We were supposed to be sleeping in the living room that night, so we grabbed snacks, pulled some blankets over to the couch, and tried to pick up the movie we'd given up on earlier. Just background noise now, just something to cover the silence. A few minutes passed. The prank calls started fading from my mind. I was beginning to relax again when, click. The sound of a door. Anthony and I turned to each other at the exact same time, eyes wide. We heard the front storm door open, slow and deliberate, the metal creaking softly, like it hadn't moved in days. Then came the unmistakable sound of the doorknob to the front door twisting. Not fast, not aggressive, just testing. It turned halfway before the lock held it in place with a soft metallic clunk. Anthony muted the TV instantly, the sudden silence making my heart pound even harder. I slowly got up, each step feeling heavier than it should, and moved over to the front window. My fingers were shaking as I reached for the blinds. I peeled them open just an inch. There was someone standing on the porch. A tall man, not moving, just standing there like he'd been waiting, watching. His figure barely visible through the faint glow of the porch light, but enough to see the outline of his coat, and how still he was. Then he moved. He turned directly toward me. Our eyes met. I froze. The man didn't flinch or step back. He didn't wave.
He just stared, head slightly tilted, face lost in shadow. I panicked and let the blind snap shut, stumbling backward as if that thin piece of plastic could somehow protect us. The room was dead silent. Neither of us breathed. We didn't move. Because now we knew he wasn't just a voice on the phone. He was here. Me and Anthony crouched in the kitchen, our backs pressed tight against the cabinet doors, barely breathing. Every little sound felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards beneath our feet, the thunder of our own hearts. Then we heard it. Clink, creak, the sound of the backyard gate swinging open. It was just outside the kitchen window. We looked at each other, frozen. "God damn it," I whispered, a surge of panic crawling up my throat. "I forgot to shut the back door." Anthony's eyes went wide. "You need to close it, now," he hissed, voice trembling but urgent. I nodded, swallowing hard. I crept toward the hallway that led to the back of the house, my feet barely touching the floor. Every step felt like it echoed too loud, like the house was betraying us. Then I stopped. I froze. Just beyond the hallway, silhouetted by the faint backyard light, was a tall figure. He stood at the back door, still, silent, looking directly into the house. I didn't think he saw me, but he was definitely looking inside, like he was waiting for movement. A shadow among shadows, his outline barely shifting. Then, click, he opened the door and stepped inside. I backed away slowly, careful not to let my feet scuff against the tiles. The air felt cold now, thick with dread. I tiptoed back into the kitchen and gestured frantically for Anthony to follow me. No words, just wide eyes and desperate hand motions.
We slipped upstairs, careful to skip the creaky steps we remembered from earlier, each one feeling like it stretched on forever. We reached his bedroom and quietly, very quietly, pulled the door shut behind us, just enough to click the latch without making a sound. We didn't even speak. We both just dropped to the floor and scrambled under his bed. He had cloth hanging from the bottom frame, one of those dust ruffles that reached the carpet. From outside, you couldn't see anything underneath unless you physically moved the fabric aside. It was our best shot at staying hidden. And so we waited. Downstairs, we heard the front door swing open. Then another door, and another. Each one creaked open, then shut again, slowly, methodically, like someone was checking each room, getting closer. Thump, a heavy footstep on the stairs. Then another. He was coming up. Our hearts were pounding so loud I was convinced he could hear us. I could hear Anthony's breathing, quick, shallow, panicked. It was too loud. I leaned over in the dark and gently, slowly placed my hand over his mouth. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom. Click. The door opened. I felt a chill flood through the room, like the air had been sucked out. We stayed perfectly still. My muscles screamed from the tension, but I didn't dare move. Footsteps entered the room, soft but deliberate.
They moved to the closet. Slide. We heard the coat hangers shifting, fabric brushing against fabric, that sound of clothes being pushed apart. Then the footsteps moved again, this time to the bed. And then they stopped, right next to us. My whole body locked up. My lungs burned from holding my breath, but I didn't move an inch. I could feel the pressure of silence pressing down like a weight on my chest. Anthony's breathing was still too loud. I tightened my hand over his mouth, gently but firmly, trying to keep him calm. I could feel his heartbeat through my palm, racing. Then, nothing. Just silence. So heavy, it felt like time itself had stopped. We laid there for what felt like forever, minutes, maybe longer. I started to think, maybe he was gone. Maybe he had left the room. Maybe we were safe. But I couldn't be sure, because if he wasn't, then he was still right there, on the other side of that thin layer of cloth, and we were inches away from him. I slowly moved my hand away from Anthony's mouth, the silence still hanging thick around us. Leaning in, I whispered, barely audible, "You think we can make a run for it?" He nodded slightly, preparing to answer, but before he could say a word, the air split apart with a sound I'll never forget. A scream. It wasn't just a scream. It was a howl of rage and madness, raw and violent. It echoed inside my head like it came from every direction at once. Then Anthony was yanked out from under the bed. I couldn't even process what was happening. One moment he was next to me. The next he was being dragged, kicking and thrashing, his fingernails clawing at the carpet as he fought to stay hidden. His legs disappeared from view, and I heard the struggle explode into chaos right above me. I scrambled out from under the bed, heart hammering, vision blurred by panic. Anthony was on the floor, twisting and screaming, trying to free himself from the grip of the man. The same man from the phone, from the door, now right here, holding him. My eyes darted around the room, desperate for anything I could use. My gaze landed on the nightstand, and sitting there, almost too perfectly, was a screwdriver. I didn't think, I just moved. I lunged at the man, and with every ounce of fear-fueled strength I had, drove the screwdriver straight into his back. His scream was horrific, shrill and pained, tearing through the room like glass breaking. He twisted violently, releasing Anthony as he reeled from the sudden burst of agony. "Go!" I shouted, and without hesitation, we bolted for the door.
We didn't look back. The only thing that mattered was getting out. But we couldn't take the road. It was too exposed, too open. If we ran toward the neighbor's house, we wouldn't make it in time. He'd see us, catch us. So we veered hard toward the tree line at the edge of the backyard, vanishing into the thick darkness of the woods. Branches clawed at our faces and arms as we dove behind a dense cluster of bushes, collapsing into the damp dirt, struggling to stay quiet through our ragged breaths. And then we waited. The back door creaked open. The man stepped out. Even from a distance, we could see him, a dark silhouette under the porch light, turning his head slowly from side to side, searching. His body tensed as he scanned the backyard, stepping carefully across the grass like a predator tracking prey. And then he turned toward the trees. I held my breath. I could feel Anthony trembling beside me. The man's gaze swept across the tree line, slow and deliberate. I watched as his eyes passed right over our hiding spot. For a moment, it looked like he hadn't seen us. But then, he stopped. His head tilted, and he turned back in our direction, right at us. We didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched as his figure remained still, staring into the woods, as if trying to pierce the darkness with sheer will alone. The silence returned, but this time it felt like it was holding its breath too. I ducked deeper behind the bush, my whole body trembling. "Joe," Anthony whispered hoarsely, eyes wide. "He's coming." "What?" I turned to him. "Dude, get up, we gotta run." And he was right. The man had seen us. Somehow, impossibly, he saw us. He was moving fast now, crashing through the backyard with a terrifying purpose. No more slow stalking. He knew exactly where we were. We jumped up and ran. The woods swallowed us again as we sprinted into the trees, the crunch of dead leaves and snapping twigs beneath our feet sounding so loud, like we were announcing our path with every step. That's when Anthony fell. He tripped over something, maybe a root or a fallen branch, and hit the ground hard with a muffled grunt. I dropped down beside him, trying to catch my breath, trying to listen. Had we gone far enough? Not even 20 seconds later, I heard them. Footsteps, fast, heavy, getting closer, barreling through the same direction we'd just come from. They stopped, 2 trees away. So close, I could hear the dirt shift under the man's boots as he slowed down, listening, searching. We lay flat, face down in the cold, damp leaves, hearts hammering so loud it felt like they were echoing through the forest. The silence wrapped around us again, broken only by our shallow breaths. Then, without warning, the footsteps started again. But this time, they moved away.
We waited, still, frozen. Every second dragged like a lifetime. Then the sounds of the man crashing through brush grew fainter and fainter until they were gone. We didn't waste another moment. We shot up and ran hard back toward Anthony's house. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but fear pushed us forward faster than we thought we could go. The leaves beneath our feet crunched and cracked with every frantic step. But there was another sound now, quieter, behind us. Another crunch, another step, not ours. He was following. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see him again. We broke through the tree line and into the backyard, stumbling across the grass. This time, we didn't forget. We slammed the back door shut behind us and locked it tight, hands shaking.
Anthony grabbed the phone and called the police, trying to keep his voice steady while explaining everything. I didn't wait. I headed to the back windows, watching for movement, for shadows, for anything. But it was too dark, pitch black. I couldn't see a thing out there. So I did something that, looking back, probably wasn't smart. I flipped on the backyard lights. Floodlights snapped on, illuminating the yard and beyond. And there he was, just standing there, at the edge of the woods, barely within the glow of the light, partially obscured by the base of a large tree, tall, motionless, watching. He didn't run, he didn't move closer. He just turned and walked slowly back into the woods, out of the light, out of sight. That was the last time either of us ever saw him. I'd love to say something eerie happened after that, like we heard knocking at the windows late at night or found strange scratches on the doors. But no, that was it. No cliché follow-up, no horror movie twist, just silence. 5 years have passed since that night. Nothing else has happened. Sometimes I still wonder, was it connected to the prank call, somehow? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. But then again, what part of that night did? All I can say is that this was the night me and my still best friend Anthony almost died, during what should have been just a dumb prank, and a weekend alone.
Me and my wife have had our fair share of arguments. Nothing out of the ordinary for a married couple. But this one night, it was different. She just wouldn't let up. She kept going on and on about the stupidest things. Every little annoyance she could think of, magnified and hurled in my direction. And then, the thing that finally broke me? I forgot to put the toilet seat down. That was it. She launched into another tirade, her voice high and sharp, cutting through the walls like a siren. It wasn't even what she said. It was the way she said it. That screeching, ear-piercing tone that makes your skin crawl and your brain feel like it's unraveling. I'd had enough. I called up my buddy Paul. He didn't even hesitate. "Come crash here, man," he said. "You don't need to deal with that tonight." That was all I needed to hear. I grabbed my keys and left. I was exhausted, physically, mentally. The last thing I needed was to keep arguing with my wife over meaningless crap. She always found something to pick at. Lately, it was the house. How all my friends had nicer homes. How we were falling behind. It never stopped. Paul, on the other hand, lived in a massive place. It was one of those modern, open-concept homes with too many rooms and more space than he needed. Another sore spot for my wife. She'd bring it up every time we drove past his place. When I got there, we cracked open a few beers, had a brat, and just chilled for a while. It felt good, like a break from the storm I'd been stuck in. Paul even told me I could stay as long as I wanted. But I told him no, I'd only need one night. I didn't want to be that guy, a burden. He showed me to one of the guest rooms. Now here's the weird part. Paul has 3 guest bedrooms, all lined up neatly along one side of the hallway, like hotel suites. But he only ever uses one of them. The other 2, never touched. He told me he planned to use them eventually, for parties or friends staying over, but so far they'd stayed locked and silent, collecting dust. His bedroom was directly across the hall, facing all 3 guest rooms. It felt oddly symmetrical, like something from a dream or a blueprint. I didn't think much of it at the time, just figured it was one of those rich guy house quirks. That night, I went to sleep in the one guest room he actually used. But I wouldn't stay asleep for long. It was a weird setup, no doubt. 3 guest bedrooms lined up in a perfect row, like something out of a hotel. But I didn't think much of it until that night, lying there in the dark. That's when I started hearing noises. They were faint at first, soft rustling sounds coming from the room right next to mine. I assumed it was Paul, maybe doing something in there. But the more I listened, the more it grated on me. It wasn't the kind of movement you hear when someone's putting something away or walking around. It was subtle, repetitive, almost deliberate. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and finally decided to check it out. Curiosity and a little irritation got the better of me. I stepped into the hallway, the floorboards cool under my feet, and tried the doorknob to the room next to mine. Locked. That caught me off guard. I frowned and crossed the hall, cracking open Paul's door just enough to peek inside. The room was dimly lit by a nightstand lamp, and Paul was already in bed, half asleep, looking groggy. "Hey," I said quietly, "you doing something in the room next to mine?" He blinked a few times. "What? No, I didn't hear anything." "It's locked," I added. "Why?" Paul rubbed his face. "Oh, I always keep those 2 guest rooms locked. Might keep some personal stuff in there." I hesitated. "Well, there's a weird noise coming from one of them. Not loud, but it's strange. Just figured I'd check." Paul looked at me for a moment, then just waved it off. "Probably nothing. Just try to get some sleep. If you keep hearing it, come get me." I wasn't thrilled with the answer, but I nodded and went back to the guest room. This time, it was quiet. Dead quiet. Whatever noise I had heard was completely gone now. I laid back in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, waiting for my heartbeat to slow down. A half hour passed. I started to drift, finally letting sleep creep in. And then, tap. A single, soft tap echoed through the wall. It came from the other side, from the locked room next to mine. I sat straight up in bed, wide awake again.
Then came a voice, faint, so faint I couldn't make out the words, but I swear I heard it. I wasn't imagining it. Without hesitating this time, I rushed back across the hallway and pushed Paul's door open. "Paul," I said, breathless, "there's something in that room." His expression changed the second he saw my face. This time, he took me seriously. He got out of bed and grabbed a small key ring from his dresser. No hesitation. We walked into the hallway, the silence between us heavy. He slid the key into the lock of the room next to mine, gave it a twist, and opened the door. The moment it swung open, a cold breeze hit us in the face. The room was dark, moonlight filtering in through the wide-open window. The air smelled old, like dust and something faintly metallic. We stepped inside slowly, and that's when we noticed. The closet door was open too, wide open. Neither of us said a word, but I could feel it. Something about this room was wrong. We tore through the room, searching every corner, every drawer. The bed caught my attention first. There were indentations on it, fresh ones, like someone had just been lying there. The sheets were slightly rumpled, but not in a careless way. It looked intentional, like someone had tried to make the bed just enough to not draw attention, but failed. Paul flung open the closet. It was stuffed with empty bags, duffels, backpacks, even a small suitcase. And his drawers, where he said he kept some of his valuables? Empty. Empty. Everything was gone. Paul's face drained of color. He turned suddenly and bolted into the hallway without a word. At first, I didn't get it. I stood there for a second, confused, until it hit me. The third guest room. I sprinted after him, my feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. We reached the third door together. Paul's hands shook as he fit the second key into the lock. He twisted it, and as the door creaked open, we both froze. A black figure, tall, fast, and faceless in the darkness, was already halfway out the window. It lunged itself onto the patio roof with a swift, almost practiced motion and disappeared from view. Paul lunged forward like he was about to go after him, one foot on the window ledge. "Don't," I grabbed his arm. "We'll lose him." Without another word, we raced downstairs and out the back door, hoping to cut the guy off. But when we reached the yard, the patio, the surrounding trees, he was already gone, vanished into the night. But what we found in that third room, far worse than the man we didn't catch. The white sheets on the bed were soaked in dried blood, dark and rust-colored,
as if it had been there for days. It wasn't a smear. It wasn't accidental. There were stains, deep and deliberate. In the closet, sitting upright against the back wall, was the butter knife Paul had told me had gone missing. It had blood spots on it, just enough to make my skin crawl. The room reeked of something stale and sour, fear mixed with iron. And of course, all his valuable belongings were gone, completely cleaned out. We stood there in silence, trying to process the full weight of what had happened. Someone, or several people, had been living in his house for over a week, right under his nose. They'd been sleeping in those locked rooms, watching us, listening, waiting. They blended in, vanished at just the right moments. Paul had even joked earlier while we were drinking about how fast his food seemed to disappear, even though he barely ate. It all made sense now. These people, homeless, desperate, maybe dangerous, had broken into his home and carved out a hidden space to survive. They lived silently between the walls of his routine, and the rest of us never saw it coming. As far as we know, none of them were ever caught. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was my first sleepover, one of those childhood milestones that feels bigger than it is. I was 10 years old, and it was at my good friend Jordan's house. We'd been close for years, but this felt like the next level. Staying the night, no parents hovering, no bedtime rules. Jordan had a huge basement. It was like our own private world down there. We played video games for hours, FIFA, Mario Kart, even some games we probably weren't supposed to be playing at that age. The clock ticked past 1 a.m., and we were still going, surrounded by snack wrappers, soda cans, and the kind of energy only two hyper kids could generate. Eventually, we gave in to sleep, but not before skipping brushing our teeth, of course. We felt like rebels, like we were breaking some sacred house rule. We collapsed onto the couches, wrapped in blankets, the game controllers still scattered on the floor like forgotten toys. I fell asleep almost instantly. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. There was no sound, no movement, just stillness. That kind of eerie quiet you only notice when you're the only one awake. The TV was still on, but the screen had gone black. Just a soft, dim glow coming from it, the kind that barely lights the room, but somehow makes the shadows deeper. That faint light was enough to let me see something. In the far corner of the basement, right by the stairs, there was something tall standing there. At first, I thought it was a coat rack or maybe a lamp, but no, this thing was taller. It almost reached the ceiling. Its shape was wrong, off, too narrow to be furniture, too still to be alive. I couldn't tell what it was, and I still don't think I could describe it properly, Even now, it just was. And then, the TV shut off completely. The tiny bit of light it gave disappeared in an instant, swallowing the basement in darkness. That moment, the sudden silence, the light vanishing, and that thing still standing there, almost made me scream. Instead, I squeezed my eyes shut and stayed perfectly still, forcing myself not to breathe too loud. My heart was racing so fast it felt like it might shake the blanket. I didn't dare move. I don't even remember falling back asleep. All I know is, when I woke up the next morning, the corner by the stairs was empty. The next thing I remember was waking up to screaming. A sharp, horrid shriek came from upstairs, raw and panicked. It jolted me out of sleep like an electric shock. I sat up, disoriented, heart pounding in my chest. It was Jordan's mom. Jordan woke up at the same time, eyes wide with confusion and fear. We didn't say a word to each other. We didn't have to. We just ran.
We bolted up the basement stairs, two kids in a rush of adrenaline, still half-dazed from sleep. The hallway lights were on now, casting long shadows on the walls as we made our way to his parents' bedroom. His mom was sitting on the edge of the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. Her hands were shaking as she tried to speak, but nothing intelligible came out. Her eyes were wide, glassy, like she hadn't fully come back from whatever she'd just seen. His dad, on the other hand, was moving fast, tearing through the room, yanking open closet doors, pushing aside curtains, checking under the bed. He wasn't saying anything either, just moving with a frantic, focused energy. He turned toward the hallway and stormed out, brushing past us without even looking. Jordan and I followed behind as he checked every room in the house. The front door, the back door, the windows, every lock. But there was nothing. No broken glass, no footprints, no forced entry. No sign anyone had come or gone.
The house was locked up tight. Empty, silent. Whatever had happened, it didn't leave a single trace. I stayed quiet that morning. We didn't play video games or talk about what happened. We just sat on the couch in silence until my parents came to pick me up. The whole house felt off, like something had settled in the air that none of us could shake. Years later, Jordan and I are still friends. We've talked about that night a few times, but he always gets quiet when I bring it up. He told me once, hesitantly, that his mom never talks about it. But on one occasion, just once, she admitted something to him. She said she saw a tall, dark figure standing by their bedroom door that night. She didn't scream because of a nightmare. She screamed because it was real. And I'm sure of it, undoubtedly sure, that whatever she saw upstairs was the same thing I saw in the basement.